Armen, what is this political crisis really about?
Well, for protesters, this is about ending state capture. In other words, this idea that the state has been essentially hijacked by oligarchs, and so if you vote for a politician, that politician will then act not in the interests of those who elected him or her, but for some other interests, often unelected business interests and so forth. And remember that the trigger for these protests was the discovery that a stretch of coast, which was supposed to be publicly owned, had actually been set aside for the private use of a prominent businessman. So for the protesters, that really was a kind of perfect snapshot of what's gone wrong in Bulgaria. And there's also this feeling that while individual politicians come and go, the establishment stays the same. And to illustrate that, in 2013, there were protests against corruption, against what was then a centre-left government, now very similar accusations in these protests against a right-wing government.
Is there a parallel with rule of law issues in other EU countries like Poland and Hungary?
Well, that's been sort of raised as a point of comparison. It's different but related in a way. So in the case of Central Europe, you've had the EU launching legal action against Poland on judicial reforms, against Hungary on the treatment of asylum seekers. Now, with Bulgaria, there is a rule of law issue as well, but it's different. So the main concern, I think, from the EU's point of view, although it doesn't always express it that forcefully, is this unresolved issue of corruption in Bulgaria, despite 13 years now of Bulgarian membership of the European Union. And clearly those issues do impact the rule of law in Bulgaria because the corruption has clearly undermined public trust in state institutions and also including legal institutions to do their job independently. So there are some parallels in a way you could draw with Central Europe, but also some differences.
So how is the EU responding to what's happening in Bulgaria?
Well, it's quite a contrast, actually, if you compare the EU and the US responses. So the US embassy in Sofia issued quite a candid statement, I think it was only last week, which says, "We support the Bulgarian people as they advocate for increased faith in the democratic system." The EU has been a lot more cautious in its response, which is curious in a way because Bulgaria is actually a member of the European Union. But I wonder if that might be to do with, if this caution might be to do with Brussels not wanting a confrontation with Bulgaria when Bulgaria itself and the government of Mr. Borisov has really tried to portray itself as a team player in Europe. It's very obviously shied away from the kind of confrontational politics that we've seen between Central European countries and Brussels. So the kind of tone, the whole approach to the EU, Mr. Borisov, whatever his domestic, whatever Bulgarians think of him at home, he has definitely portrayed Bulgaria as very much a member of the European project. So we haven't seen this kind of nationalist rhetoric that we've seen from leaders in Poland and Hungary, for example. And indeed quite the opposite. Bulgaria has just joined the exchange rate mechanism, which means that it's signaling that it wants to join the Eurozone and thus become a fully paid up, if you will, a member of the European project.